Mr. Sridhar Potaraju hails from Hyderabad, India, where he spent his childhood and formative years. Upon completing BCom honors from Hyderabad, Mr. Sridhar Potaraju was admitted into CLC University of Delhi in the year 1994. Upon completion of LLB degree in 1997, he enrolled himself as an advocate with the Delhi Bar Council in 1997 and is practicing before the Honorable Supreme Court of India for more than 2 decades. He has a penchant for writing, reading, and learning about the ancient Indian texts and spends his leisure time in research and reading. He has interests in reading Itihasas like Ramayana and Mahabharata and applying the values and wisdom contained therein in modern context. Professional and personal inclinations for research blended in bringing contextually relevant portions of our Itihasas and Indian literature into the case material filed before the courts in cases in which it was appropriate. He was a core member of the legal team for Sri Ramlalla Virajman, the plaintiff in the Sri Ramajanma Bhoomi case before the Honorable Supreme Court. His contribution in the case, apart from legal issues, was also by way of research from Itihasas and Puranas from his personal library. In behalf of Indic Academy, we also need to announce that currently Sridhar Potaraju Garu is taking care of the responsibility of looking after the Pamighantam Kodandaramaya Center for Indic Studies in Law and Justice, which is a part of Indic Academy. Sridhar Potaraju Garu, over to you.
Namaskaram. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a very star-studded session today that we have, and to be the opening batsman gives its own jitters and nerves. But be that as it may, the topic that is been assigned to me to speak today is rule of law and an Indic perspective. Now, rule of law is something which all of us are quite familiar, that we would have heard in the sense of dharmo rakshati rakshitaha, which has been the ancient wisdom that we have. Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha speaks about dharma as the epitome of a human conduct in various spheres of life, and one who adheres to dharma in all his spheres of life is protected by dharma in turn. So rule of law is nothing but a simplified version of dharmo rakshati rakshitaha, where rule of law is depicted by the rule by which law, which is brought in to govern the human conduct, is made the basis for all social relations or social contracts. In the Indic context, what we see as the governing dharma or law is the Vedas as the basis, which have given us through Shruti the way of life in various spheres. Thereafter, we have Smritis and their commentaries, Itihasas, Puranas, Upapuranas as a source of law or dharma. And then we have Sadachara or custom and usage, which is followed by the society at large. The Western concept of rule of law, as was introduced by the colonizers in our country, brings in a law being applied equally to all the citizens. The administration of law or the adjudication of disputes is associated with the judiciary. The creation of law is associated with the sovereign or the king, and the execution is through the king's own machinery, the administrative machinery. Whereas on a contrast, in the Indic space, the king was only a custodian of adjudicatory process of the laws, and he was never the source of law. So that is the core difference between the Western and Indic approach towards law, or in this context, I am using dharma and law as interchangeably because amongst various other meanings, dharma also refers to law, which a person is required to follow or abide by. Here, if we look at rule of law, we may easily refer to it as Dharma Rajya. That is, law is the king of kings, and law, aided by the power of the king, enables the weak to prevail over the strong. In other words, there is a social order where every person, every species has a dharma to follow. And if any species or a human violates this dharma, then the king steps in and uses his might to set things right. In the Satya Yoga, it is believed that dharma was on all four legs, and therefore there was no need for a king at that stage, the initial stages, where everyone knew their dharma and then adhered to their dharma. But by the next Yuga, Treta Yuga, when Sri Rama was born, dharma was probably reduced to three legs, where adharma had started. So we see a lot of asuras causing a lot of disturbance to the practices of people, harming people in various aspects of their life, be it the rishis, maharshis performing their yajnas or homas. As we all now get to understand that the rishis, maharshis were the contemporary scientists who would actually espouse the cause of improving the quality of life of the society by performing certain rituals and yajnas. Yajnas are also sacrifices, and then making things happen for the world, be it ensuring proper rains or ensuring dharma is practiced in the society by preaching. Those people's practices were getting disturbed by the asuras. So it is where you find Vishwamitra, a powerful monarch himself, chooses to come to the Dasarada's court and seeks protection of the king, that our yajnas are getting disturbed. So kindly use your might and force and then protect us from the asuras. Not that he himself could not have actually killed the asuras, but his energies were preserved for a better purpose. So it is not that all of us actually spend our energies to fight a war defending our country. It is channelized through the state machinery, through the state forces. Similarly, the request of Vishwamitra was recognizing the skills and the competence and the purpose of Sri Rama's birth, to take him along to defend the yajna from all these attacks. In this context, it's very interesting to know where Sri Rama was promised to be taught by Vishwamitra. But Dasharatha, having promised protection, backtracks. He says, no, I will not send my son because he's too young. And then he chooses to backtrack. Then the guru chides him and tells Dasharatha that once you have promised protection, you cannot go back, and that will be actually bringing disrepute to your family and also to yourself. It is adharma, being untruthful. Rama is sent. Now, when Rama is sent, he is required to kill Tatak. So when that question comes about whether he is authorized to kill a woman, because all through our civilizational heritage, even the constitution recognizes the special status of women and children. Now, whether it is proper or improper, whether it is dharma or adharma, is the question that Rama has. And Vishwamitra answers this question. See, we are looking at the conflict between a purported social dharma of actually giving a special status to women, and the Raja dharma of actually disciplining or actually killing someone who's causing adharma. It is here Vishwamitra actually encourages Rama, saying that as a king's representative, you are required to perform certain things in order to establish dharma. And then he justifies killing of a woman, Tatak. So that actually shows us that the concept of dharma was something which was above King Dasharatha, above Sri Rama himself, whom we believe is an avatara. Virtually from Valmiki Ramayana onwards, if you look at various aspects of Ramayana. Now, when we talk about rule of law, we are also looking about the source of law. The sadachara or the customs are recognized. So now, what are the customary practices of each ashrama? So Rama, when he is in the Vanavasa, is to live like a hermit. So he does not enter any city. He doesn't enter the palace or the city of Sugriva also. That is the dharma of his time for the ashrama that he was following. Similarly, if we look at the other aspects of what he's done while killing Vali, that's a very interesting debate that happens where Rama is questioned by Vali on being shot at, saying that how could you actually not face me in a combat or not actually come and sought my help to begin with instead of going to Sugriva. The beautiful answers that Rama gives is, I am the representative of Bharata, the king, emperor, and my duty is to establish dharma. You have unlawfully abducted your brother's wife and you are actually living with her, which is not permissible as long as your brother is alive. And two, being an animal, I'm endowed as a Kshatriya to hunt. So therefore, I don't have to come in front of you and then shoot you. So on both counts, he establishes on a principle. Whether we agree or not is a matter for debate. But he asserts himself not because I am Rama and therefore is right. He tries to give reasons and attribute it to a principle which is established and accepted. And Vali actually accepts that reasons and then bows down to Rama. So that's the essence of how our civilization has recognized rule of law. Now, if we move forward, even Asuras or in Ravana's Lanka, when Hanuman actually destroys the Ashokavana, he goes, he allows himself to be tied down and brought to the court. Ravana wants to kill him. Vibhishana says that no, he's an ambassador, you can't kill him. So this diplomatic immunity is a concept which was accepted and practiced, and as we can see that practice being reflected in this episode where Hanuman is not actually killed, but for the damage that he's done, they feel it is befitting to actually humiliate him and therefore probably burn his stake. Now what happened thereafter, of course, is folklore. Now if we look at the Mahabharata as well, here we find instances where Yudhishthira is in a dilemma when he's invited to play a game of dice. He knows Shakuni is evil and that he has no choice. Now, when questioned about his decision to go to the game of dice, he answers by saying this, that I was told after the Rajasuya that in 13 years, I will be the cause for the death of Kshatriyas on this planet, on this earth. So I would not like to create any reason which would justify Dhritarashtra to be feel offended for me having declined his invitation to come and play dice, nor give Duryodhana any cause to say that I have become arrogant and therefore I need to be conquered through a war. So in his attempt to avoid war, he actually concedes to something which is recognized as a vice, even in those times. And then the consequences are there. Similarly, when we go to the Kuruseva episode where Draupadi is actually brought in when she's in her season in single robe and humiliated, she raises certain pertinent questions about dharma. Here we again see that in that society, dharma was considered higher than the king and the assembly. So that even the assembly together could not have altered dharma. Vidura actually is the only one who actually raises the questions and then forces Bhishma to answer, which he deters. Draupadi's questions in the Sabha are actually legendary, which are being debated even now on the pros and cons. I mean, whether Yudhishthira could have actually waged his wife is the first question, and whether he could have waged her having lost his own freedom. So a person who's a slave, can he actually offer anything else as a wager? Then also the consent of the other brothers. So these are all questions that she raises and she seeks an answer. In this context, references are also made to a conversation between Prahalada, the Prahalada, I believe the reason for Narasimha Avtara to come to this world. He's been faced with a situation where his son and and a learned man waged their lives, claiming superiority over each other in their knowledge, and they needed a proper chosen arbitrator, which is a concept we know, a chosen arbitrator, that where the parties to the dispute actually will choose a tribunal to adjudicate and then agree to be bound by the decision. So Prahalada is chosen. Then Prahalada says that there is a conflict of interest here. My son is a party to the proceedings before me, and therefore there is an inherent bias that is there that might influence my decision. So therefore I would not like to take take the role of an adjudicator and arbitrator. Here his guru advises him that once you occupy an office, you are duty bound to administer dharma when somebody seeks adjudication of a dispute, and you do not have a choice not to. And therefore you have to adjudicate this dispute. And Prahalada, being Prahalada, adjudicates and decides that his son is inferior to that Brahmana, the learned man, on knowledge, which would have had a consequence of his son being killed. Of course, the Brahmana returns his son's life for his adhering to dharma. Now we are looking at various characters, all of whom are very powerful, who are in sync, or probably for whom God has himself incarnated, and still they all consider themselves bound by dharma. Dharma being the basis on which they derive their own strength, because it is considered that the adherence to dharma is the only basis for a country to flourish. So therefore, Yatha Raja Tatha Praja is very symbolic. What we talk about, the trickle-down effect in the contemporary times. If the king is following certain dharma, his dharma, the chances of his subordinates and citizen following it are higher. Whereas if the king himself is deviant, then the question of the king following or people following the king would be very natural, and it is easy. And we've experienced politically also with individual leaders, and their stature and their own character has influenced the public behavior in our times as much. Now, if you look at another aspect in this regard, international law, or say a protection to someone who's not really your citizen or somebody else. Here I would recall the anecdote relating to Sibi Chakravarti. This was taught to us in school in Hyderabad as a part of our Telugu syllabus, and it stayed with me. Sibi Chakravarti is known for his dharma. A dove seeks his protection when it is being chased and hunted down by an eagle or a hawk. So it lands in the court and then seeks protection. Sibi Chakravarti, as duty bound by dharma to Saranagata, he protects. He says that I'll grant protection. It is followed by the eagle, the hawk, who enters the court and says that you can't protect him because nature has endowed the dove as my food. How can you actually deprive me of my food? It will be against law of nature. It's a very tricky situation that Sibi Chakravarti is put in. On one hand, he is seen to be violating the law of nature by depriving hawk its natural food, and then having to go back on his word given to the dove of protection of its life. So it is here that this conflicting situation, the debates that ensue, emerge on Dharma Shastras being referred and cited on both sides. Eventually, the agreement that the hawk reaches is that Sibi Chakravarti shall have to give a part of his body's right thigh's flesh equivalent to the weight of the dove, which he willingly offers himself on a scale and realizes the scale is not dipping. And then it turns out that it was gods Agni and Indra who came to test his virtue. So again, if you look at it, none of these characters, right, in Ramayana or Mahabharata, assert themselves that मैंने बोला इसलिए है, like probably Shivagami says in Bahubali. It is here that dharma is above everyone, and dharma is the basis on which everyone is actually actions are judged, both in their personal and social lives. Now, to give a glimpse, I think there are many scholars after me who are going to go into more details on this subject. The guiding principle for interpretation of this sadachara as a custom and usages have developed. See, we were not a static society. Vedas were there. Vedas did not give out much law, but they would only say Satyam Vada, Ahimsa Paramodar, kind of principles. They have been further.
I hope you are approaching your conclusion now.
Yes, 2-3 minutes. I'm conscious of the time. So I'm conscious of Kala Dharma. So their interpretation is also guided by beautifully referred to as the three rinas that everyone is believed to be born with: Daivaruna, Rishiruna, and Pitruruna. My interpretation of Daivaruna would be our duties towards the Creator and His creation, which is nature, flora, fauna, all the species in this world. Rishiruna is the learning that we have to begin with our mother, father, whoever takes that position in our lives, the teachers, siblings, friends, mentors, and others, and people younger than us also many a times teachers a lot of it. So the learning that we acquire is the Rishiruna. Then Pitruruna is the duty that we perform towards the family and then to continue the human race. So that the Pitruruna is also fulfilled. Here we are looking at a life which is controlled and regulated in adherence to a dharma. Subsequent times they have been codified by various commentators on various branches of law, and then modern contemporary parallels can easily be drawn from various commentaries in our ancient texts. The ideal man in that society that we are talking about is a person who has manodanda, which is control over his thoughts; vagdanda, control over his speech; kaya danda, control over his body. Because most of the offenses are committed through these three. The mind is the instigator, where the evil enters as a thought, and it can lead to evil verbal actions or bodily actions. And then further, it has been explained by various authorities in much detail. The verbal actions could be speaking untruth, attacking others by abusive language, carrying tales against others, talking ill of others, and the bodily actions could be taking what is not given, theft, etc., misappropriation, injuring living beings, physical injury, and then illicit relationships. It has been considered to be a very heinous thing. So purity of relationships of man and woman or physical relationships has always been considered as a highest dharma in our society. So these are the broad principles which were there, which governed our living. And I think they are still relevant and contemporary, and they actually ought to be part of our academic curriculum so that we have a comprehensive worldview and a harmonious existence in the society. I am really grateful to this opportunity, and Nagaraj Garu, thank you very much for this.
Thank you, sir. So it was a really enlightening talk on the rule of law, showing how the rule of law was not a gift by the colonial jurisprudence literature to us, colonial jurisprudence practice to us. It was always there. They cannot claim a right or authority over introducing rule of law to us. Thank you very much, sir, for this enlightening talk.